Hey guys, today we step straight into the dusty boots of a medieval peasant. And by that, I mean we are skipping brunch, coffee, and anything remotely resembling comfort. Welcome to the 24-hour diet of the forgotten majority. The people who lived hard, worked harder, and ate, well, barely. You are going to hear every gritty bite, every hollow pang, and every time I considered licking moss just to feel something. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. The day begins before the sun's even cracked the frost. There is no alarm clock, just the bleating of animals and the persistent hunger that never really went away overnight. Our peasant, let us call him Thomas, lives in a wattle and daub hut, one room, a straw mattress, and not a single piece of insulation. He wakes up cold, sore, and starving. Breakfast. If you are expecting eggs and bacon, you are in the wrong century. Thomas starts with a hunk of black rye bread. Dense, chewy, and stale enough to bludgeon a rat. It is yesterday's bread, possibly the day before's, softened in weak ale or maybe goat's milk. If he is lucky, it is coarse, full of unmilled husks, and baked in a communal oven that scorched one side and undercooked the other. No butter, no jam, just calories, barely. Alongside the bread, there is gruel, a thin barley or oat porridge, cooked the night before in a soot-blackened pot over the hearth. It has been reheated with water and a pinch of salt, if the family can afford it. The texture is somewhere between cement and regret. Thomas spoons it down slowly, blowing on each bite even though it is barely warm. It sticks in his teeth and scratches on the way down. Breakfast was not even considered a proper meal for much of medieval Europe. The church often frowned upon eating early, viewing it as gluttonous. Most peasants ate because they had to. Energy before the labor began, not because it was culturally embraced. And speaking of labor, as Thomas eats, he is already planning the day, hauling firewood, fixing fencing, tending to pigs, collecting water. Food is fuel, not pleasure. Some rural villages baked trencher loaves, thick slabs of stale bread used as edible plates. After meals, the trencher was either eaten, fed to dogs, or given to the poor. This was not just practical. It was an early, crusty form of composting. Historians still argue whether peasant diets were truly as grim as we often portray them. Some say subsistence agriculture allowed for fresher vegetables and simple abundance. Others point to famines, crop failure, and social records of chronic malnutrition. What is certain is that food security swung wildly depending on season, status, and weather. Back in Thomas' world, the bowl is scraped clean, the bread crust gnawed to uselessness, and the hunger, still there, dulled, not gone. He wipes his hands on his tunic, grabs his tools, and steps into the dirt-flecked dawn, stomach dragging behind like a lazy mule. By mid-morning, Thomas has already hauled wood, scraped pig muck, and taken more steps than your overpriced fitness tracker could count. His muscles ache in that dull, constant way that says this is not soreness. It is just how life feels. There is something else growing inside him, the gnawing emptiness of a stomach that only pretended to be full at breakfast. It is just before noon when he returns home, or rather, to the smoky hut where his family is stirring the main meal of the day. In the medieval world, dinner came at midday, not in the evening, and it was the biggest meal they would get. Not that this means abundance. The fire has been stoked since morning, but the smoke barely escapes the chimney hole, curling in thick fingers around the rafters. The hearth is the kitchen, the stove, and the heater, all rolled into one. Over it hangs a cauldron filled with what can only generously be called stew, a mix of boiled turnips, wild onions, cabbage cores, maybe a bean or two if the gods are smiling. No meat today, or yesterday, or the day before. Meat is for feast days, weddings, or the generosity of lords. The only thing swimming in this pot is hope. The broth is thin, grayish, and smells faintly sulfurous. Thomas' wife crushes in a few wild herbs for taste. Not that it helps much. Salt, the miracle mineral, is expensive and used sparingly. Instead, most flavor comes from bitterness, nettles, dandelion greens, and maybe some sorrel, if it is in season. Medieval peasants rarely wasted food. Root peels, leek tops, cabbage stalks, all went into the pot. This was not a culinary choice. It was necessity. Waste nothing. Survive longer. Thomas tears another chunk of that rye bread and dips it into the steaming liquid. It softens the crust just enough to chew without wincing. The stew itself is surprisingly filling, mostly thanks to the sheer volume of fiber, but flavor. Think of drinking garden compost with a hint of wild garlic. Some villages added clay or ground chalk to thicken their stews. Why? Because it made the meal feel heavier. A full stomach, even artificially, was better than an empty one. There are even records of mixing old breadcrumbs with animal blood and barley to make a pseudo-dumpling, rustic and unsettling. Historians still argue whether peasants had access to more variety than we assume. In coastal regions, fish may have supplemented diets. In foraging areas, mushrooms, berries, and nuts made rare but welcome appearances. But that depended heavily on the season, the region, and whether your local lord allowed you access to the forests. Thomas eats in silence, except for the occasional slurp and cough from smoke irritation. His fingers are blackened from the fields. The stew warms him, slightly, but there is no spark of joy, just sustenance. Fuel for another round of toil. As the pot is scraped empty, Thomas lingers, not because he is savoring it, but because he is trying to feel full. There is no dessert, no sweet, no comfort, just the return of hunger, waiting to clock back in. The sun begins to sink behind the hedgerows, casting long amber shadows across the village paths. Thomas' hands are raw, his back bent from a day of repetition, lifting, digging, fetching, mending. His stomach gives a warning groan, like an old door hinge asking, "Really? Again?" But yes, again. Supper in a medieval peasant household is humble, even by their already subterranean standards. Unlike the hearty if tasteless stew from midday, evening meals are sparse, sometimes entirely skipped if the food stores are running low. Tonight, they are lucky. There is a pot of pottage, a thinner, more watery version of the earlier stew, mostly barley with a few stray greens and the faintest hint of leek. It simmers in silence. The family sits close together, not around a table, but huddled on stools and floor mats, sharing from the same bowl. The heat from the hearth is comforting in theory, but the smoke clings to their hair, their clothes, their lungs. Thomas takes a spoonful, lets it sit in his mouth longer than usual, as if trying to tease out some imaginary flavor. Bread makes another return, now harder, colder, and far less forgiving than in the morning. It is crumbled directly into the pottage to bulk it up. A few drips of ale, low alcohol, homemade, are passed around, enough to rinse the mouth, but not enough to soften the day. Most medieval peasants ate 2 meals per day, with the evening one being significantly lighter, partly because of church fasting traditions, partly because there simply was not enough food to stretch 3 ways. And now the fun part, there is a small onion in the corner of the pantry, old, a bit soft, but still technically edible. Thomas splits it in half and shares it with his wife. The sharpness hits hard, a sudden jolt of sensation in an otherwise flavorless parade. It is intense, it burns a little, but for a few moments, it feels like something. In some regions, people flavored pottage with things like hedgehog fat or fermented fish brine when salt was not available. Monks in certain areas even developed something called green sauce, a slurry of herbs, vinegar, and stale bread that was poured over bland foods to spice them up. Tasty, debatable, historical, absolutely. Some accounts describe shared laughter, storytelling by the fire, or even song. Others depict silence, exhaustion too deep for words, interrupted only by coughing or crying children. The reality was likely both, depending on the day and the season. Thomas finishes the last spoonful. It is tepid by now. His belly is fuller than it was, but there is still that ever-present hum of hunger under the surface, the kind you learn to live with. He leans back against the wall, head tipped toward the smoky rafters, eyes closed. No dessert, no tea, no kitchen cleanup, just sleep on a scratchy mat, with a dull stomach and a body begging for rest. He does not dream of feasts. He dreams of more, of an extra scoop of barley, a sprinkle of salt, a bit of pork fat, a fantasy in a world where food was not joy, but hope. As the fire fades and the night tightens its grip, Thomas lies awake in the dark, not because he wants to, because hunger does not let you sleep easily. The thin pottage of supper has already burned off, and his stomach, betrayer of his efforts, has circled right back to empty. There is no pantry raid in this world, no fridge light casting a holy glow over late-night snacks. There are no snacks between meals. Thomas gets absolutely nothing unless he sneaks a nibble of raw turnip or swipes a crust meant for tomorrow. Even the act of chewing something outside a meal is considered suspicious by neighbors or even sinful by the local priest. Peasants did not graze or snack like we do today. Food had ritual, timing, boundaries, and for the most part, it had to be earned. The constant state of motion and labor did more than justify the calories. It demanded them, but the calories did not always show up. In most of medieval Europe, the average peasant's diet was shockingly low in calories, often around 1,500 to 2,000 per day, despite burning far more than that through physical labor. Chronic undernourishment was not rare, it was routine. Thomas's body knows it by now. His legs ached not just from work, but from weakness. His stomach cramps slightly, not the sharp pang of missed lunch, but the dull twist of knowing it is going to be like this tomorrow, too. He wanders briefly to the wooden shelf near the hearth. Maybe there is something, a radish, a crumb. There is half an onion skin and a bowl crusted with old barley. He scratches some off and licks it from his finger. That is dinner. Part 2. Some peasants chewed on bark, straw, or even pebbles to trick the body into thinking it was eating. It was not unheard of for children to gnaw on cloth dipped in broth water just for the taste. Sound extreme, it was, but so was daily life during harvest. Diets may have improved, more grains, more access to fresh produce, maybe even shared meat, but during Lent, famine, or drought years, it could be nothing but water and hope. Survival depended on factors far beyond personal effort. Soil quality, weather, taxation, war, rats. There is also no sugar rush to escape into, no candy, no fruit juice, no sweetened bread. Sugar itself was astronomically expensive and used sparingly even in noble households. Honey, maybe, if you happened to live near wild bees and did not mind risking a few stings. But for Thomas, sweetness is a fantasy, reserved for holy days or the dreams of childhood. He returns to his straw mat, body weary, mind scattered. It is a strange clarity that hunger brings. Each bodily sensation feels louder, more urgent. There is no room for mood swings or contemplation of purpose. Just one thought, quietly echoing. I need food. There are no cheat days, no protein bars, no pantry door to swing open and see what is in there. Thomas drifts off at last, not to sleep, but to conserve energy, the best-case scenario. He is hungry tomorrow, but not hungrier. That is what passes for hope in this world. Dawn bleeds in through the cracks in the wall, not so much lighting the room as exposing it. Thomas wakes stiff, his joints creaking like old wagon wheels, the chill biting through the worn wool blanket. His stomach groans again, no longer dramatic, just resigned. Hunger is not a novelty anymore. It is a fact of being. He sits up slowly, massaging his knees, and takes stock. His breath is sour, his hands ache. His thoughts feel muted, like they are trudging through the same mud he walked yesterday. He is not dying, but he is not quite living either. The first task of the day is not stretching or journaling or sipping lemon water. It is hauling firewood. Again, breakfast is just the idea of food. There is not much left. Maybe another scrape of porridge, if anything survived last night. He might even skip it and wait until midday. That is not dramatic. That is just strategy. Chronic hunger shaped the psychology of medieval peasants. It taught them to live moment to moment, storing mental energy for work, not worry. Survival was not guaranteed, and food dictated everything, from moods to marriages. As Thomas moves through the early morning fog, something shifts, not in his gut, but in his head. The hunger has stopped screaming. It is just background noise now. The dull H has become part of the rhythm. Some medieval sources note how long-term undernourishment led to a kind of food numbness. Peasants would talk about eating with no enjoyment, only habit. The term hollow meal shows up in a few folk tales, referring not to the food, but the feeling. It was not sadness. It was detachment. Historians still argue whether this state made people emotionally stronger or just more broken in. Did hunger forge resilience, or did it crush imagination? Some point to the vibrant festivals, folk songs, and storytelling as proof that joy still found a way. Others see it as desperate escapism from a life too bitter to taste. Around noon, Thomas shares the final bits of cabbage stew with his wife. It is not good, but it is warm, and today, that is enough. She smiles weakly as she passes the bowl. He tears the bread more gently this time. They eat slower, not to savor, but to stretch, and something remarkable happens. In the silence between slurps and chewing, there is peace, not the joy of being full, but the quiet of having enough. Just for now, just for this one moment. They laugh once, briefly, when the neighbor's scout knocks over a bucket and startles the chickens. It is small, but it matters. Thomas wants to remember today as a feast, but he will remember it as a day survived, and in the medieval world, that was a win. So now, the sun dips again. The pot is empty, the fire low. The sky turns soft with dusk and smoke. Thomas lies down once more, not full, not content, but alive, and that, in his world, is everything. Food was not pleasure. It was not escape. It was effort. It was ritual. It was survival. Let the silence hold for a moment longer. Imagine the feel of straw beneath your back, the weight of bread in your hand, the flicker of firelight dancing across stone. That was the taste of peasant life. Dense, dark, and unforgettable.